Welcome to the Story Vault, Chapter 1, A Window on Arlington Street. To an Englishman of conservative tastes and practical shoes, Boston presents itself like a lecture politely declined. It is sober where New York is brash, learned where Chicago is loud, and regards enthusiasm as a moral weakness. Even its harbor seems to wear spectacles. We arrived on an evening powdered with snow, that faint expectant hour before the lamps come on, and the world remembers to look romantic. The motor car deposited us before the Ritz-Carlton on Arlington Street, a limestone fortress trimmed with good manners and doormen as still as chess pieces. Inside, warmth pressed against the glass doors like a held breath. Poirot, muffled to the chin and radiating disapproval, paused in the revolving door to polish a speck from his glove. "Regard Hastings," he murmured. "The symmetry, she is admirable, but the proportions, non, they are too Protestant. Even the carpets are modest." "Boston prides itself on restraint," I said, stamping snow from my boots. "Restraint," said Poirot, "is a virtue only when one wishes not to dance." Me. I prefer the tango. The lobby glowed with that expensive light which flatters marble and humiliates the poor. A pianist ghosted through Gershwin. Bellhops glided, and somewhere unseen, a tray of silver rattled like distant applause. It was elegance rehearsing itself, and yet there was, as Poirot noted, no warmth. The place smelled faintly of beeswax, coffee, and money that never apologizes. We had crossed the Atlantic at Harvard's invitation. The university had requested that Hercule Poirot deliver a lecture on statistical tendencies in modern crime. Poirot had accepted with the satisfaction of a man invited to correct the 10 Commandments. For 3 days he had been feted, photographed, and finally bored to extinction. That afternoon, as we descended the lecture hall steps, he announced that America required one demonstration of order and method before she may rest content. I thought he meant another lecture. I was wrong. It was then that fate, in the form of a lady wearing a mink stole and a look of urgent indecision, descended the mezzanine stairs. She was young, no more than 25, with that polished fragility peculiar to women who have never carried their own parcels. Her gloves trembled slightly as she adjusted the pearls at her throat. The hotel manager, tall and anxious, intercepted her near the telephone alcove. There was a brief, whispered exchange. The woman shook her head once violently and vanished into the lift. Poirot's eyes had followed the scene with feline concentration. "Voilà," he said softly, "a woman who has quarreled with herself and lost." "You think she's distressed?" "I think," said Poirot, "that she has decided to tell the truth, but not to whom." Before I could protest this typically elliptical remark, the manager reappeared, mopping his brow. His relief at seeing us was so theatrical that I half expected him to curtsy. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, what extraordinary fortune! You are in the hotel." Poirot inclined his head the precise degree required to acknowledge both compliment and inconvenience. I scarcely know how to ask," stammered the man, "but a terrible accident has occurred upstairs. A guest, Miss Elenina Randolph, has been found shot in her suite. The police are on their way, but her family begs for discretion. Might you well have a look?" Poirot's eyebrows rose with delicate surprise. "An accident, you say?" "So it appears, sir. A tragic mishandling of a firearm, perhaps. But there are circumstances." "There always are," said Poirot. He removed his gloves with slow precision. "You permit that I verify whether accident and appearance are indeed on speaking terms." Moments later, we were ascending in the gilt cage of the elevator, the manager wringing his hands and the operator staring straight ahead in the manner of men who see too much for their salary. The carpeted corridor of the 5th floor was hushed, except for the faint hiss of steam heat and the tremor of distant traffic below. Outside, Suite 512, a bellboy stood guard, pale to the lips. The smell reached us before the sight did, a dry metallic sweetness that speaks of powder and panic. Poirot paused at the threshold, observing everything. A room service tray abandoned halfway down the hall, a single high-heeled shoe turned neatly against the wall, and a brass door number slightly askew. "Observe, Hastings," he said. "Disorder, the shy sister of tragedy. She peeks from behind the curtain before the others arrive. Inside the suite might have belonged to any prosperous traveler. Silk dressing gown on the chair, perfume bottle on the vanity, typewriter on the writing desk. Yet it was instantly and terribly occupied by absence. Miss Randolph lay half-reclined on the shed's long, one hand dangling toward the carpet, the revolver several inches beyond her reach. Poirot knelt beside her, his small figure composed and reverent. He did not touch the weapon. He merely examined the alignment of her arm, the angle of the wound, the trajectory through the fabric of her robe. "Curious," he murmured. "The bullet enters upward. How do you say? Against gravity. The lady, she would have to shoot from beneath her own heart. It is not impossible, but it is, how one says, unflattering to the geometry." He glanced at the writing desk. 2 champagne glasses stood there, one with lipstick, one without. Between them a half-finished telegram, "Dear Harry Equals, must see you tonight. Stop. Cannot carry on. Stop." The pencil still lay beside it, freshly sharpened. Poirot's gaze lingered on the telegram. A woman who decides to die does not pay for a telegram, mon ami. She pays for silence. The manager made a nervous sound. "There was no one registered as Harry, sir. But a gentleman in grey was seen leaving by the service stairs about half an hour before, well before the discovery, and the door bolted from inside. The chambermaid had to fetch the master key. Bon. Then we have a tragedy that entered by the service stairs and left by the imagination." He moved toward the window, where snow pressed in dim circles against the glass below us. Arlington Street lay muffled and immaculate. Carriages drew long sighs in the cold. Poirot touched the curtains delicately, inspecting a faint smear of powder on the inner hem. "Someone fired from here," he said quietly. "The mark? It is too neat for cleaning. Aben, an untidy suicide, a tidy murderer. The combination is familiar." I felt the old quickening in my chest, that peculiar thrill that means in Poirot's company, "Another holiday has just been cancelled." "You really think it's murder, then?" Poirot's mustache quivered like twin punctuation marks. "I think, Hastings, that in Boston the virtue is very exact. And so is the sin. When one disguises itself as the other, it leaves a line of symmetry too perfect to be accidental." The elevator bell chimed at the corridor's end. The first uniformed officers were arriving, brisk, embarrassed, careful not to look impressed. Poirot replaced his hat, giving the room one final comprehensive glance. "The family begs for discretion," he said thoughtfully. "Discretion we shall give them, but not silence. No, none. Silence. It protects only the guilty." As we stepped back into the corridor, the bellboy's knees seemed about to give way. Poirot patted his shoulder with unexpected gentleness. "Courage, Mati. The dead, they do not frighten. It is only the living who rehearsed the part too well." We walked to the lift in silence. Somewhere far below, the pianist had resumed his tune. I got rhythm, played in waltz time, absurd and tender all at once. Poirot listened, head tilted. "America," he said at last, has rhythm but no melody. In crime, as in music, she begins with the refrain and forgets the introduction. Come, Hastings, let us find the overture. And as the lift doors closed, the corridor behind us held its breath, waiting for the next act of a drama that had already begun before anyone realized there was a play. Chapter 2. The Lady in Grey. The following morning dawned the color of old pewter. Boston, so dignified in daylight, looked faintly ashamed of its own nocturnal behavior. The snowfall had hardened into a crust that cracked beneath each wheel on Arlington Street. From our windows at the Ritz, one could see the common stretching white and unsmiling, its trees like pen strokes drawn by a particularly severe hand. Poirot, immaculate in his dressing gown, sat before the breakfast tray with the grave absorption of a man reading the small print on eternity. The coffee steamed, the croissants aligned like recruits on parade. Across from him lay the Boston Morning Globe, its headline trimmed with the restraint of a city that dislikes scandal but sells it anyway. Socialite found dead in Ritz-Carlton. Police call it suicide. Beneath the headline, a photograph. Nina Randolph, smiling as though she had already forgiven the future. Poirot tapped the paper. You observe, Hastings. Even the typography, she is discreet. In Paris, the letters would dance. Here they apologize. You don't believe it was suicide. My friend, he said, buttering his croissant with surgical precision. I believe nothing before coffee and everything after. He took one sip and set the cup down. Now I believe it was murder. I stared. But the police seemed satisfied. Exactly, said Poirot. And satisfaction, mon ami, is the first symptom of blindness. At 10 o'clock we were summoned to the manager's office, a discreet chamber upholstered in remorse. Inspector Collins of the Boston Police was waiting. A solid man with the look of one who has been obliged to memorize the regulations for smiling. He greeted us with cautious politeness and an expression suggesting he had been warned to tread carefully around the famous Belgian. Appreciate your assistance, Mr. Poirot, he said, but I don't expect this will take long. The medical examiner is certain it's self-inflicted. Poirot inclined his head. And the family? Miss Randolph's uncle arrived this morning, Mr. H. Augustus Randolph. He owns half of Beacon Hill and the other half's opinion. He's anxious to avoid publicity. A quality much admired in criminals, murmured Poirot. Collins flushed. We've done a thorough check. The door was bolted from inside, no sign of entry, and the revolver's hers. The maid heard the shot around 8:30 p.m. when she knocked. No answer. That's all there is. Poirot steepled his fingers. Tell me, Inspector, you have considered that bolted doors can be arranged after death. The American gave a dry laugh. You mean one of those locked room tricks? This isn't a detective story, Mr. Poirot. On the contrary, said Poirot gently. Every crime is a detective story until the detective is chosen poorly. Collins exhaled through his nose. You can view the body again if you like, but I'd rather you didn't make a circus out of it. Poirot rose. A circus. Number. We perform only for the truth. And she, alas, does not sell tickets. Suite 512 was now in police custody, its glamour replaced by chalk marks and photographic flashes. The maid who had found the body waited in the sitting room. She was a slim Irish girl named Kathleen Duran, with anxious blue eyes and the guilt of the innocent. Poirot approached her with courtly gentleness. Mademoiselle, you were fond of your mistress. Oh, yes, sir. Miss Randolph was always kind. She'd tip me for flowers and call me dear, not like some of the grand ones. And yesterday she seemed nervous. Asked me to bring up 2 glasses and a bottle of champagne for a friend. I thought nothing of it till later. What time was that? Around 7, sir. She said she'd dress for dinner, but she never went down. Then, just after 8, I heard a pop. Not loud and like a cork, maybe. I waited a bit, then knocked. No answer. I fetched Mr. Hardy, the night manager. We opened the door. Her voice faltered. Pugh nodded gravely. You have done well, mademoiselle. Tell me, when you entered, were the lights on? Yes, sir. Only the window curtains half open. Ah, half open. He turned toward the desk where the telegram still rested under a glass paperweight. He examined it without touching. This telegram. She wrote it in haste. Yes, yet the pencil is freshly sharpened. You see, Hastings, precision and panic do not share a timetable. The maid hesitated. There's something else, sir. Miss Randolph got a letter that afternoon. I put it on her tray myself. Gray envelope, foreign stamp. Italian, I think. Bonn. And where is this letter now? The girl looked toward the wastebasket, now emptied by the police. Poirot sighed. Then we must seek it in a dustbin, the most democratic of archives. While the inspector organized statements, Poirot moved about the suite like a small, precise hurricane of logic. He measured the window ledge with his penknife, examined the revolver with a magnifying glass, and even inspected the soles of the maid's shoes for comparison. From the corridor came a murmur. A tall, austere man in morning black had arrived, followed by a younger woman whose grief looked rehearsed for society. Mr. Augustus Randolph possessed the face of an income statement, hard, exact, and capable of ruin. He bowed briefly to Poirot. My niece's death is a private matter, sir. I must ask that it remain so. Pooh regarded him kindly. I understand, monsieur. Privacy and guilt are often confused, but I will respect your wish for the one while investigating the other. The man stiffened. You imply I imply nothing. I arrange the facts until they confess themselves. The niece's cousin, Miss Marian Randolph, fluttered her handkerchief. Ella Lenena was engaged, you know, to a Mr. Harry Cololton, Harvard Law, very promising. But the engagement was broken off last week. Awful quarrel. Something about money or another woman, perhaps? Collins seized on it. This Colton, where is he now? Abroad, said Marian quickly. Went to her on business. Pooh's eyes gleamed. He turned to Augustus. Your niece. She was of independent means. The uncle's lips thinned. She had a trust income. Comfortably. So why? Because when a rich young woman quarrels with a poor young man, someone usually makes a profit. When the Randolphs had gone, Poirot drew me aside to the window. Snowflakes brushed the glass like erased words. Below, policemen tramped, their boots leaving orderly footprints that already puzzled him. Hastings, he said softly, you observed the carpet near the desk. I did. It looked quite ordinary. Precisely. Too ordinary. Yet last night there were 2 champagne glasses. This morning one is missing. The maid swears she left both. You think the murderer returned? Or never left? But why impersonate her? To ensure that the right woman was believed still alive, while the wrong one was already dead. He smiled faintly. A simple trick. When the audience prefers illusion. That afternoon the hotel resumed its habitual grace, but an unease threaded through the marble like a hairline crack. Guests whispered, chambermaids crossed themselves. The pianist shifted from Gershwin to Chopin, as though melody might restore morality. Poirot spent an hour in the manager's office examining the guest register. His fingertip paused halfway down the list. Hastings, what do you notice here? I squinted. They all look like normal names. Exactly. No initials, no abbreviations, save one. H. Colton registered yesterday morning, checked out at 9 p.m., the very hour of the tragedy. Good heavens. You think, I think, said Poirot, that the ghost of Miss Randolph had an appointment with the ghost of her fiancé, and one of them kept it. He replaced the register. His eyes are light with that unmistakable gleam which means sleep has been permanently postponed. Mon Hastings, he said, we dine early tonight. The American steak is indigestible, but the conversation may not be. After all, he smoothed his mustache. Murder, like the soul, collapses if you wait too long. Chapter 3. The Telegram and the Tear. Boston woke like a scholar roused from a nap, clear-headed, faintly displeased, and determined to proceed by rules. The morning air was brittle as spun sugar. Cabs clicked past the Ritz with the prim industry of beetles. Down in the lobby, the pianist had abandoned his sentimental experiments and was playing scales, as if chastened by the weather. At 10 o'clock, Inspector Collins collected us for the medical examiner. The city's morgue occupied a building of Calvinist temperament with windows that looked as though they refused to gossip. Inside, the air smelled of carbolic and unpersuaded paperwork. Dr. Appleton, a spare gentleman with a pencil mustache and a distrust of adjectives, received us beside a slate table upon which Miss Eleanina Randolph lay arranged in a final and terrible poise. Poirot bowed his head a fraction. He regarded the dead with that peculiar reverence of his that never seemed pious, yet always felt correct. Time of death, said Appleton. Approximately 8:30 last night. Pulmonary congestion from a single gunshot wound to the left chest. The projectile traversed the lower lobe of the lung and tore the pericardium. Death in minutes. Powder tattooing? Said Poirot softly. None, said Appleton. At close range, one expects stippling, singing, even faint smuts. The entry is clean. No burning, no unburned grains embedded. In my opinion, the weapon was more than 2 feet from the body at discharge. Collins frowned. Could a suicide do that? Arm outstretched. She would need a curious angle, said Appleton. Upwards and away from herself. Poirot's eyes had moved from the wound to the face. Eleanor's features were composed, the makeup scarcely smudged. A single faint track ran from the corner of one eye into the soft hollow near the ear. A tear, murmured Poirot. Collins shrugged. Women cry, especially when they mean to. He stopped, coughing into his fist. Poirot did not answer. He bent closer, examining the ear, the lobe, the curl pinned behind. With a gloved finger he lifted a strand and brought it to his nose, thoughtful as a vintner. Orange blossom, he said, but her perfume upon the dressing table upstairs was jasmine. He straightened. One does not change one's signature scent between supper and death, unless one intends to be noticed. The doctor gave a small professional sniff. If you gentlemen have concluded almost, Poirot indicated the hands. No particulate, no nitrate trace. Appleton pursed his lips. Paraffin tests are unreliable, Mr. Poirot, and we do not perform them for headlines. There is nothing visible to the eye, fingernails clean, except a minute dark smear upon the left fourth finger. Pooh peered. Powder clung in grief, perhaps, when a hand brushed a curtain hem. He met my eye briefly. You recall, Hastings? I recalled very well the pale gray smudge he had shown me on the inner edge of the curtain in Suite 512, as neat as a signature one attempts to ignore. We left the morgue to the keeping of its decencies. Outside, the thin sun had the moral fortitude of a schoolmaster. It illuminated without flattering. Collins tugged his hat lower. You've had your look, he said. My commissioner wants this closed. Suicide, private sorrow, full stop. Poirot adjusted his muffler. When one makes a full stop at the comma, Inspector, the rest of the sentence begins to shout. Collins sighed. What now? Now, said Pooh. We returned to the hotel. There are two conversations to be had, one with the telegram and one with the dust. The Ritz regarded tragedy as a guest who had slipped past the porter. It would be shown out courteously. Afterward, the carpets would be brushed, and perhaps the orchestra would play something bracing. The manager, with a look of having slept in his tie, admitted us to his office, where the hotel's telegram blanks were stacked like devotional pamphlets. The original is at police headquarters, he said, passing a carbon copy on thin tissue. You can see the drafting, though. The message sat there in its clipped desperation. Dear Harry, equals must see you tonight. Stop. Cannot carry on. Stop. Pooh slid the copy beside a half-dozen other forms, blank, saved for their printed header. He measured with his eye the place where the pencil had pressed hardest. Then he pointed, not at a word, but at the top edge. You observe the tear, Hastings. The carbon bore a tiny triangular notch, as if the paper had been torn hastily from the pad, and snagged upon a brass stud. He placed a fresh blank beneath it, aligned the headers, and the notch mated perfectly with a burr on the pad's metal spine. Voila, he said. She wrote the message here in this office, not at her desk upstairs. Who then placed it upon her desk half-finished with a newly sharpened pencil? A suicide who drafts her farewell in the manager's office? He shook his head gently. None. A draftsman of appearances. Collins scowled. Anyone could have written it downstairs and carried it up. Exactly, said Poirot. But why? So that we should believe the lady summoned Harry to her room. And yet the message was never handed in. It is theater, Inspector. The murderer is an impresario. He turned to the switchboard recess, where two operators in neat headsets sat, like priestesses of a modern oracle. A red-haired girl with a capable jaw, Miss O, rose when we approached. You were on last evening. I was, sir. You will forgive a little curiosity. Between 7 and 8, did you connect suite 512 with any number ending in 407? She considered, eyes gone distant with the memory of chords and clicks. Yes, sir. 512 rang 407 at 10 to 8. Short call, under a minute. Hey. Poirot's eyes brightened. And did you, mademoiselle, note a call from 512 to the service stair extension, perhaps to ask that a guest be shown up discreetly? That I can't say, sir, but Mr. Hardy. He had a message sent to a bellboy to watch the service stairs after 8. There'd been a complaint about a man in gray loitering. Collins was already scribbling. Room 407. The register provided the name we expected and did not expect. H. Colton. Checked in yesterday morning out at 9 p.m. Inspector, said Poirot mildly, if the gentleman is still delighted to be abroad in Havana, I shall be very surprised. Or very nervous, Collins muttered. We left the desk for the housekeeping floor, a backstage of linen carts and polish, smelling of starch and strictness. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Flynn, had the expression of a woman to whom dust was a personal insult. Poe asked with deference whether any glassware had been found out of place since last night. Found one flute in the service closet by 512, she admitted, reluctant. Lipstick on the rim. Disgraceful, I said. May I see? She produced it from a tray. Poirot held it up so the light found the print of a mouth, precise, distinct. From his pocket he drew a folded handkerchief, the palest silk, and without touching lip to glass, compared the breadth. A small mouth with a cupid's bow, and the lipstick, not the American pillar box red, but the French rosewood. See the cooler undertone. Miss Randolph's shade upstairs was apricot. 2 glasses, 2 women. Or 1 woman twice, said Collins, but it sounded feeble even to him. Poirot examined the inside of the service closet. On the shelf lay a gray woolen glove, right-handed, a tiny pearl button at the wrist. He weighed it in his palm and smiled without that being in any way comforting. "Keep this very safe, if you please," he told Mrs. Flynn. "We shall return it when the hand is ready to claim it." We were halfway along the corridor when a young man in a porter's jacket hurried after us with the anxious look of someone pursued by his conscience. "Beg pardon. Are you Mr. Poirot?" "I'm Joey. I run errands." He swallowed. "I saw the lady last night. Not Miss Randolph, the other one. She came out of 512 just after I heard the bang. She had the mink, same as Miss Randolph, in a gray dress. She told me she was feeling faint and asked for water. I got some from the service sink. When I came back, she was gone." Collins seized him by the elbow gently. "Did you see where she went?" "No, sir. But there was something else. She dropped this. I put it in my pocket, then got scared after the police came." He produced a paper scrap folded small as a confession. Poirot unfolded it with a delicacy that made the porter relax in spite of himself. It was a ticket stub torn neatly, printed in black upon cream. Society of Boston Museum Lecture, Caravaggio, and the Problem of Shadow. Last evening's date, 7 o'clock. Poirot's eyes glittered. "Art and shadow," he murmured. "How very Boston." Collins looked nonplussed. So she attended a lecture before she killed or saw someone killed. What does that give us? "A room full of witnesses who will remember a mink in a gray dress," said Poirot. "And a subject, the problem of shadow, which our murderer embraces with enthusiasm." He turned the stub over. On the back in pencil was a telephone number and a single word: Harry. The afternoon spun itself like thread on a bobbin, methodically without glamour. We visited the museum. We found among the alumni and patrons several ladies of the requisite silhouette. One, a Miss Lydia Vale, had indeed worn gray and mink. She flushed at the mention of the Ritz, and gave an alibi embroidered with cultural references. Another, Mrs. Lorton of the Fenway, smiled too easily, and owned a lipstick of precisely that French rosewood shade. Both knew Mr. Harry Colton. Both believed him engaged to Eleanor, until suddenly he wasn't. At 5 we returned to the Ritz to discover that room 407 had yielded a small harvest, a hotel stationery sheet upon which someone had practiced a signature, H. Colton, in 3 different hands, a ticket for the 11 o'clock night train to New York, and folded in the wastebasket a gray envelope with an Italian stamp and a Boston postmark dated yesterday at noon. Inside the envelope was no letter at all, only the bottom half of a page neatly torn along its equator. The surviving lines in a slanting feminine hand read, "Cannot keep your picture, nor the copy. The original belongs to the church. You must return it. I will tell Harry." Poirot held the fragment against the light, as though truth were watermarked. "The telegram is the playbill," he said softly. "This is the play. Picture. I said copy of what a painting said. Caravaggio, or something that pretends his shadow. Our Miss Randolph had perhaps a reproduction too good for honesty, a theft cloaked as collecting, a love promise paid for in art, a quarrel conducted in the language of restitution." He looked at Collins. "Does Mr. Colton have dealings with dealers? He clerks in a law office and spends money as though it's elastic," Collins said grimly. "I can find out about dealers." "Do so. Meanwhile, we must find the other half of this letter. The murderer tore it to keep the sentence that convicts, but the dust keeps what the hands discard." He turned to me, eyes bright. "Hastings, to the basement." There exists below every grand hotel a republic of boilers and brooms where the truth resides in bags. The refuse had been collected from the 5th floor in 2 canvases and trundled here by an uncomplaining man with arms like ship's cables. Poirot chose 1 sack, not by chance, but by a glance toward the time chalked upon it, 8:50 p.m., and knelt with a sigh that was half apology, half anticipation. He is never more himself than when sorting rubbish. Out came tissue, corks, the foil from a champagne neck. Out came a broken pencil and a sliver of glass that did not belong to the hotel pattern. And then, delicately, as a fisherman lifts a silver thing from a brook, he drew forth a torn half-page, stained with what might have been perfume or rain. He laid it beside the first fragment. The edges married as if guided by habit. The sentence spoke at last, complete. "Cannot keep your picture, nor the copy. It is wrong. The original belongs to the church at San Lorenzo. You must return it, Harry. I will tell Harry." Collins squinted. She's telling Harry twice. Poirot's smile was that of a magician who has not yet produced the rabbit, but has felt its warm tremor in the hat. "Ah, Inspector, but perhaps there are 2 Harrys, or 1 Harry with 2 faces." He lifted the matched page and sniffed. Orange blossom again, fainter now, mingled with dust and regret. "Monair Hastings," he said, rising. "We have our telegram, and we have our tear. The tear in the paper, the tear upon the cheek, and the tear in the curtain that caught the powder as it fell. All 3 say the same thing. Someone stood between Eleanina Randolph and the truth, pulled the trigger from a distance, and left us a little theater to applaud." He dusted his hands delicately, as if removing not dirt, but illusion. "Come. The overture is finished. Now we shall hear the motif. It is written in gray, and it is set to the key of money." And with that, we climbed from the kingdom of dust back into the respectable glare of the Ritz, the snow outside unmarred again, as if Boston, that conscientious city, had already rewritten the evening to suit its conscience. Chapter 4. 2 Women in Gray. Boston's morning light has the politeness of a librarian. It illuminates, but it never intrudes. The snow on Arlington Street had crusted to silver, and the city moved through it with quiet, deliberate feet. Inspector Collins arrived over breakfast, carrying an air of fatigue that did not flatter him. "2 ladies want to speak with you, Mr. Poirot," he said separately. "Both say they can help. One's that Mrs. Lorton from the Fenway. The other's Miss Lydia Vale, the lecturer. I can arrange it here if you prefer." Poirot dabbed his lips with his napkin. "Invite them one at a time, Inspector. The truth, she dislikes company." She entered the sitting room of Suite 512 like a verdict already written. Gray satin, a fur stole that glowed like complicity, and eyes that would have looked fine upon a banknote. "Mr. Poirot, I trust we can be discreet." Her voice carried the faintest impatience of someone accustomed to obedience. "Always, madam." Poirot indicated a chair. "You knew Miss Randolph intimately enough to be exhausted by her. Mrs. Lorton said Eleanina was impulsive. She believed every cause was a calling, and every whisper a tragedy. She telephoned me yesterday afternoon, hysterical about a letter she'd written to Italy. Something about returning a painting. The Magdalene. So I gathered. I told her to burn the letter and calm herself. You see, the copy was mine originally. I loaned it to Harry Colton for study. He was verifying the pigment, or so he claimed. I never expected him to parade it as genuine." Collins stirred. "So the forgery touches you directly?" Mrs. Lorton met his gaze. "Indirectly, Inspector. The forgery is Colton's. The embarrassment would be mine." Poirot leaned forward. "You went to the Ritz last night. She hesitated just long enough for honesty to catch up. Yes, I meant to collect the painting quietly, before she involved the authorities. When I arrived, she was gone. And so, apparently, was the truth. Did you see Miss Randolph's body? Number. The manager stopped me at the lobby. I left at once. Poirot studied her gloved hands. Your perfume, madam. Orange blossom, a small smile, a habit from Paris. Does scent matter to murder? Sometimes, said Poirot. It lingers longer than alibis. She rose, composed, leaving behind a faint trail of that very fragrance. When the door closed, Collins muttered, She's hiding something. Of course, said Poirot. The question is whether she hides guilt or reputation. In Boston, the difference is small, but it exists. The second visitor arrived half an hour later, punctual and plainly anxious. Miss Vale was all precision, neat hat, gloves folded, exactly no perfume at all. Her face bore the calm determination of a woman who has rehearsed truth until it sounds believable. Mr. Poirot, she said, I don't know if this will help, but I feel responsible. Miss Randolph was at my lecture last night. She sent a note afterward asking me to come to the Ritz at 8. Because of the painting? Yes. She said Harry Colton had deceived her, that she meant to confront him. I tried to dissuade her. She insisted she'd have him arrested if he didn't confess. You went? I did. I arrived at 8. She was alone, anxious, but resolute. She asked me to wait in the sitting room while she telephoned. I heard her say, Tonight, the certificate. No more delays. Then there was a knock at the service door. She told me to stay put. I heard a man's voice, low, angry, and then the sound of the door closing. The door muffled the words. I could tell only that it was a man's voice, not whose. A moment later came another voice, lighter, a woman's, and then a soft pop like a cork. Then there was silence. I eventually looked in perhaps 15 minutes later, and she was slumped on the chaise. Collins frowned. And you didn't call the desk? I panicked. I thought if it were Harry, if people knew I'd been there. She pressed her gloved hands together. I left by the service stairs. I'm ashamed of it. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. You are certain there were 2 visitors? First a man, then a woman? Yes, quite certain. He rose courteous again. Mercy, you have done well to come. When she had gone, Collins turned. That's our eyewitness. Poirot shook his head. No, Inspector. That is our conscience. She believes what she says, but she saw through fear, not clarity. Still, she gives us one new fact, the sound like a cork. We shall test the acoustics. We returned to Suite 512 that afternoon. Poirot closed the curtains halfway and gestured for silence. Then he tapped the revolver's trigger guard with a pencil. The noise was sharp, but duller than a cork. He turned to the champagne bottle on the table and eased the wire free. The cork leapt with a soft pop that made Collins start. Indistinguishable at a distance, Poirot said. Our witness heard celebration, not violence. He examined the wall opposite the chaise longue. Note the faint mark, Hastings. A circle of soot about the size of a coin. A candle, I suggested. A lantern, said Poirot. A projection lantern. The murderer stood here adjusting light for the Magdalene. When Miss Randolph rose to protest, the weapon fired from behind the beam. Then she was shot while looking at the painting. I exclaimed precisely. The final irony. She died facing the false. Collins bent close to the wall. There's a fine scratch beside that mark. A nail from the projector's frame, said Poirot. Our brown paper parcel. Our fragment of glass. The lantern was here. He stepped back, eyes bright. Now the scene is complete. A lady, a copy, a blackmail demand, and a demonstration gone fatal. But who fired? I asked. 2 women claim innocence. One man flees, another guard, silence. Which of them carried a scent of orange blossom that clung to the dead? Voila! That is our next pursuit. Collins closed his notebook. You think it's Mrs. Lorton? I think perfume tells us she was there, Poirot said simply. Whether before or after the shot, we shall learn tonight. At dusk, as we prepared to dine, the hotel porter Joey knocked diffidently. He held a small envelope. Beg pardon, sir. They found this in the service corridor behind the fifth-floor linen room. Thought it might matter. Inside lay a torn baggage tag from a trunk printed with a name and destination. Ritz-Carlton, Havana Express departure, postponed. Poirot read it twice. Tia, our traveler, did not travel. He meant to, but someone delayed him. He tapped the word postponed. The Clear writes such a note only when the passenger himself cancels. Collins's eyes widened. You think Carlton stayed here after all? I think, said Poirot, that while Boston slept, Mr. Colton was no farther than the service stairs. And if he remained, he saw who left the suite. He placed the tag on the table beside the revolver and the glass fragment. Tomorrow, Inspector, we will find our lantern and the man who postponed his departure to watch a murder. Poirot adjusted the small arrangement until it resembled an altar. Two women have confessed to fear. One man will confess to purpose. We are very close now. He turned toward the window where the snow had begun again, thin and deliberate. Boston writes its tragedies neatly, Hastings. One must read the footnotes. Chapter 5. The Man Who Did Not Leave. Boston thought just enough to drip guilt from its eaves. By morning, the pavement steamed faintly like consciences drying in the sun. Poirot, immaculate as ever, sat before a breakfast tray whose geometry could have been patented. Cup, saucer, knife, egg, all precisely equidistant. The torn baggage tag lay beside his plate. Departure postponed, he murmured. So convenient a phrase, mon ami. One may apply it to voyages, lies, or repentance. Collins entered without ceremony. We've located the porter who handled Carlton's trunk. He says Colton came down to the lobby around 8:10, paid his bill, and told the desk he might still catch the 9 o'clock train if the weather held. He never showed at South Station. And the trunk? Asked Poirot, still in the luggage room. Then Monsieur Carlton remains spiritually, if not geographically, in Boston. Poirot rose, brushed an invisible crumb from his cuff, and announced, We shall call upon the luggage first. Murder often packs poorly. The Ritz stored its secrets behind brass grills and polite clerks. The luggage room smelled of camphor and discretion. On a lower shelf, a brown leather trunk bore the stencil Ritz-Carlton Havana. Poirot crouched, running a fingertip over the lock. Recently opened, he said. See the faint polish where a key turned after the dust had settled. Collins produced his skeleton key. The latch yielded with an offended sigh. Inside lay a layer of shirts, 2 books of law, a shaving case, and beneath them a long, narrow box wrapped in brown paper. Pew slit the string with the gentleness of a surgeon. Within lay a brass projection lantern, its lens cracked, the wick charred. The theater's machinery, said Poirot softly. Our murderer's tool of illumination. Collins exhaled. So he really did project the painting. May we? He shows her the image of the Magdalene, the copy masquerading as original, while the true weapon lies in shadow behind. It is art, Inspector, but without beauty. Fingerprints. Pew shook his head. Wiped clean. But the wick tells the tale. The oil is scented. He held it to his nose. Orange blossom again, our recurring note. He replaced the lamp carefully. Let us pay Mr. Carlton a visit. If he has indeed postponed, The hotel's courtesy suite for late departures will be his limbo. The courtesy suite occupied a discreet corner of the mezzanine meant for travelers delayed by weather or morality. We found Colton there, hat on his knee, eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. "Gentlemen," he said at once, "I've told your inspector everything. I didn't kill Eleanor. I tried to stop her from ruining us both." "Us both," Poirot repeated. "She had the letter from Italy. Proof the painting was stolen from a church at San Lorenzo. I begged her to keep quiet till I could put it right. Then Mrs. Lorton stepped in with threats and lawyers. It was a nightmare. Mrs. Lorton wished to recover the copy. She wished to recover her investment," said Colton bitterly. "She financed my research, then accused me of forging the certificate. I admit I drafted a duplicate, but only because the real document was damaged. The picture itself was genuine. Or I thought so." Poirot's head tilted. "And you carried a revolver." Colton blinked. "Good God, no. Yet the revolver in Miss Randolph's room bore your fingerprints on the barrel's rim." He stared. "She asked me to examine it once weeks ago. She kept it in her desk after some burglaries were reported. That's all." Poirot nodded gently. "Then tell me what happened last night exactly." Colton rubbed his temples. "I arrived shortly after 8. Colton said she was expecting me. I used the service stairs to avoid gossip. We argued. She said she'd expose everything to the Italians. Then someone knocked at the corridor door. She said, 'Wait here,' and went to answer. I heard a woman's voice, calm, older. I didn't wait, that's all. I never heard a gun." "And you left behind the lantern?" said Poirot. His mouth fell open. "Lantern? I've never seen one." Pooh studied him a moment longer, then said quietly, "You will not leave Boston, monsieur." "Not yet." When we had gone, Collins muttered, "He's lying." Poirot shook his head. "He tells truth enough to build a scaffold, but another climbs it." That afternoon we returned to Mrs. Lorton's townhouse. She received us in the music room, conducting a small orchestra of lawyers' letters across her escar. "Again, Mr. Poirot, I've said all there is to say. Perhaps, madame. But the painting's whereabouts remain mysterious. It was not in Miss Randolph's suite, nor in Mr. Colton's trunk." Her composure faltered for the first time. "Then someone stole it." "Precisely," said Poirot. "Stole it twice, perhaps. Once from the church, once from you. Might we examine your collection?" She hesitated, then led us to a gallery hung in the dim amber light that flatters guilt. Landscapes, portraits, one unmistakably modern nude, and, in pride of place, a canvas newly uncrated and half-veiled in muslin. Poirot drew back the cover. The penitent Magdalene gazed out, her eyes wet with paint and irony. Collins gave a low whistle. "So that's where it went." Mrs. Lorton's voice sharpened. "Elena sent it back to me last week." A gesture of remorse. "Indeed," said Poirot, curious then, that the back of the canvas still bears the Ritz baggage label. She flushed scarlet. "I had it collected naturally." "Of course." Pooh's tone was courteous, but fatal. "And when you collected it, madam, did you also collect your perfume?" "The same fragrance found upon the curtain beside Miss Randolph's body." Her lips parted, then closed. "You're mistaken." "Perhaps." Poirot bowed. "Yet one thing remains true. Someone delayed Mr. Colton's departure. If not you, then who?" She said nothing. The fire clicked. Poirot inclined his head. "You will forgive me. I admire loyalty, even to error." Outside, Collins let out a low whistle. "She's cornered." "Non," said Poirot. "She is cornered in appearance only. A Boston matron does not confess until after tea." Chapter 6. The Problem of Shadow. I have seen many finales arranged by Poirot, drawing rooms turned to theaters, suspects to audience, and facts to footlights. Yet the little comedy the Ritz provided that evening had, as Poirot observed, a Boston finish, polite, exact, and designed that no one spill the tea. Inspector Collins secured the manager's private parlor. It possessed the virtue of neutral carpet and chairs that made no one comfortable. Present, Mr. Augustus Randolph, composed as a ledger. Miss Marian Randolph, pale and fluttering. Mrs. Lorton of the Fenway, polished to a high civility. Miss Lydia Vale, precise and grave. Mr. Hardy, the night manager, Kathleen the maid, Joey the porter who ran errands, and Mr. Harry Cololton, who looked as though sleep had been postponed to the next century. Poirot took his place not by the fire, but beneath the gas sconce, where the light drew a gleam from his shoes and a small star from each cuff-link. Upon the side table he arranged a little still life, the cracked projection lantern still wrapped in its brown paper, the torn baggage tag, a champagne flute with lipstick like a pressed leaf, and a single grey glove with a pearl button. Monsieur, Madame Poirot began. Before we speak of blood, we must speak of stagecraft, for it is not with murder, but with theatre that our story opens. A lady died in Suite 512. Yet she was not the first actor upon that stage. He gestured to the lantern. This, the lamp of illusion. Someone brought it into the room to project the image of the Magdalene upon the wall. A little show of art, of repentance, while in truth it prepared the scene for death. See the soot mark here, the faint scratch of the frame. It stood there, the light burning through oil scented with orange blossom. Upon the dead woman's cheek, we find that same faint perfume. Perfume Mesame lingers longer than alibis. He lifted the glass. 2 glasses, though one was hidden. The missing flute, discovered later in the service closet, carries lipstick of French rosewood, a shade Miss Randolph never wore. And beside it, this glove, grey wool, pearl-buttoned, belonging to another woman entirely. Voila! Our murderer leaves us the color of her costume and the scent of her deceit. Mrs. Lorton's gloved hands were very still upon her lap. You see, Madame, Poirot continued almost kindly, you gave us Boston's preferred tragedy, suicide, discreet and well-dressed. You arranged the props, the perfume, the copy of a sacred painting. You meant only to shield a reputation. But your theater summoned a harsher critic. Collins grunted. You're saying Mrs. Lorton shot Miss Randolph? No, said Poirot. I'm saying she built the stage. For the shot, I say nothing yet. Her chin lifted. Absurd. Ah, but listen. You had the strongest reason to suppress scandal. A forged certificate tied to your patronage, a copy parading as an original, and a letter already on its way to Italy. Mr. Randolph persuaded you that exposure would destroy not only his family name, but your good taste. To protect you, he said, the word that blinds more women than love itself. He inclined his head. You were not wicked, madam, merely practical. But you created an illusion so perfect that a murder could hide within it. Now, Poirot said softly, we leave the theater and attend to the machinery. He turned toward Randolph. Your niece's letter ends. You must return it, Harry. I will tell Harry. Everyone assumed both meant Mr. Colton. None. You, monsieur, were christened Henry Augustus, called Harry in your youth. The letter threatened to tell you of you, to expose your part in the forgery, the investment, perhaps even the theft. For a man who owns half of Beacon Hill, that would not do. Randolph's face remained still, but his pulse flickered in his throat. You came by the service way a little after 8, said Poirot. Mrs. Lorton had prepared the little theater, the lantern alight, the champagne ready, the curtain half drawn. The light fell forward, leaving the window recess in shadow. Mademoiselle Randolph sat with her back to it, watching the projected picture, believing she was to be reasoned with, not judged. When you entered, Mrs. Lorton thought only of reconciliation. She opened the door, stepped aside, and at your sign drew the cork. The pop masked the single shot fired from behind the drape. The bullet's upward angle, the lack of stippling, the powder smear upon the curtain, they tell the tale. The orange blossom oil from the lamp touched your sleeve as you steadied your aim. The gray glove fell when you turned too quickly. Randolph gave a thin smile. You have a talent for invention, non-missure, for alignment. He turned to the table. The door appeared bolted from within. Yes, yet Mr. Hardy lent you the nightstaff key, the one that can draw the bolt from outside. You used it, then sent him for the master key so the door might be discovered locked. Thus, the illusion of suicide was perfect. Randolph's control wavered at last. There was no other way, he said quietly. She would have destroyed everything. Poirot bowed his head. So you destroyed her instead. Silence held the room. Even the radiator seemed to hesitate. Poirot straightened the items on the table one last time. The lantern, the glass, the glove, like symbols on an altar. Madame Lorton, he said gently, you will answer for concealment and for the lie that followed. Mr. Hardy, for your silence bought with donations, but the true act, the pulling of the trigger, belongs here. He nodded toward Randolph. Boston's virtue, tidy and exact, has confessed its own hypocrisy. Collins moved forward. The click of his cuffs was very soft. Randolph murmured almost to himself, there was no other way, and allowed himself to be led out. Mrs. Lorton rose silently. Miss Vale wept a precise number of tears. Mr. Colton sat rigid as arithmetic completed itself, and Marian Randolph's hand found mine for an instant, like a child's, before pride reclaimed it. When the door closed, the room seemed to exhale. The manager stammered. Mr. Poirot, I do not thank Maisie, Poirot interrupted. Merely mend. Replace your night manager with a man who prefers poverty to bribes, and double the wages of those who told the truth. It did not come cheaply. We went then, Poirot and I, to the now silent suite 512. The chalk had been brushed away. The curtains rehung. See the soot mark here, the faint scratch of the frame. It stood there, the light burning through oil scented with orange blossom. Upon the dead woman's cheek, we find that same faint perfume. Perfume Mesame lingers longer than alibis. He lifted the glass. 2 glasses, though one was hidden. The missing flute, discovered later in the service closet, carries lipstick of French rosewood, a shade Miss Randolph never wore. And beside it, this glove, gray wool, pearl-buttoned, belonging to another woman entirely. Voila! Our murderer leaves us the color of her costume and the scent of her deceit. Mrs. Lorton's gloved hands were very still upon her lap. You see, madame, Poirot continued almost kindly, you gave us Boston's preferred tragedy, suicide, discreet and well-dressed. You arranged the props, the perfume, the copy of a sacred painting. You meant only to shield a reputation. But your theater summoned a harsher critic. Collins grunted. You're saying Mrs. Lorton shot Miss Randolph? No, said Poirot. I'm saying she built the stage. For the shot, I say nothing yet. Her chin lifted. Absurd. Ah, but listen. You had the strongest reason to suppress scandal. A forged certificate tied to your patronage, a copy parading as an original, and a letter already on its way to Italy. Mr. Randolph persuaded you that exposure would destroy not only his family name, but your good taste. To protect you, he said, the word that blinds more women than love itself. He inclined his head. You were not wicked, madam, merely practical. But you created an illusion so perfect that a murder could hide within it. Now, Poirot said softly, we leave the theater and attend to the machinery. He turned toward Randolph. Your niece's letter ends. You must return it, Harry. I will tell Harry. Everyone assumed both meant Mr. Colton. None. You, monsieur, were christened Henry Augustus, called Harry in your youth. The letter threatened to tell you of you, to expose your part in the forgery, the investment, perhaps even the theft. For a man who owns half of Beacon Hill, that would not do. Randolph's face remained still, but his pulse flickered in his throat. You came by the service way a little after 8, said Poirot. Mrs. Lorton had prepared the little theater, the lantern alight, the champagne ready, the curtain half drawn. The light fell forward, leaving the window recess in shadow. Mademoiselle Randolph sat with her back to it, watching the projected picture, believing she was to be reasoned with, not judged. When you entered, Mrs. Lorton thought only of reconciliation. She opened the door, stepped aside, and at your sign drew the cork. The pop masked the single shot fired from behind the drape. The bullet's upward angle, the lack of stippling, the powder smear upon the curtain, they tell the tale. The orange blossom oil from the lamp touched your sleeve as you steadied your aim. The gray glove fell when you turned too quickly. Randolph gave a thin smile. You have a talent for invention, non-missure, for alignment. He turned to the table. The door appeared bolted from within. Yes, yet Mr. Hardy lent you the nightstaff key, the one that can draw the bolt from outside. You used it, then sent him for the master key so the door might be discovered locked. Thus, the illusion of suicide was perfect. Randolph's control wavered at last. There was no other way, he said quietly. She would have destroyed everything. Poirot bowed his head. So you destroyed her instead. Silence held the room. Even the radiator seemed to hesitate. Poirot straightened the items on the table one last time. The lantern, the glass, the glove, like symbols on an altar. Madame Lorton, he said gently, you will answer for concealment and for the lie that followed. Mr. Hardy, for your silence bought with donations, but the true act, the pulling of the trigger, belongs here. He nodded toward Randolph. Boston's virtue, tidy and exact, has confessed its own hypocrisy. Collins moved forward. The click of his cuffs was very soft. Randolph murmured almost to himself, there was no other way, and allowed himself to be led out. Mrs. Lorton rose silently. Miss Vale wept a precise number of tears. Mr. Colton sat rigid as arithmetic completed itself, and Marian Randolph's hand found mine for an instant, like a child's, before pride reclaimed it. When the door closed, the room seemed to exhale. The manager stammered. Mr. Poirot, I do not thank Maisie, Poirot interrupted. Merely mend. Replace your night manager with a man who prefers poverty to bribes, and double the wages of those who told the truth. It did not come cheaply. We went then, Poirot and I, to the now silent suite 512. The chalk had been brushed away, the curtains rehung,